The sky over Valenhale had taken on a strange, oppressive gray that morning. The kind that sits heavy in the air, making everything feel just a bit more sinister than it should. I sat in my living room, staring at the TV as I sipped my coffee. Normally, I'd tune out the local news. Stories about strange sightings and creatures weren't exactly uncommon in our country. But today was different. The newsman spoke in a tone that made me pay attention. Residents near the Great Lake are urged to stay away from the water after multiple sightings of a merman. Eyewitnesses claim the creature is responsible for several recent disappearances. Authorities warn the public to remain vigilant and to avoid the lake until further notice. I set my cup down, my stomach twisting. A merman? I'd heard of them before, sure, but usually in far-off places, in stories told over a campfire or whispered in hushed tones by old-timers who'd seen things they couldn't explain. But this was happening right in my backyard. The Great Lake had been my sanctuary for years, the place I went when I needed to clear my head, to get away from the daily grind. I'd been fishing there since I was a kid, and I had plans to meet my buddy Tom there today. But now, I wasn't so sure. Disappearances? A merman? Even in a country where supernatural creatures weren't unheard of, that sounded like something to avoid. I grabbed my phone and shot Tom a quick text. "Did you see the news about the merman?" His response came back almost instantly. "Yeah, I just did. You still coming?" I hesitated. "Yeah, but maybe we should avoid the usual spot. That's where they said it's been seen." Tom's reply was typical of him. "You worry too much. I'll be at the dock. More fish for me." Tom was always like this, dismissing any danger, confident that nothing would ever happen to him. He had this unshakable belief that the weird things in our country were just part of life, nothing to be too concerned about. And while part of me wanted to believe that the warnings were just overblown, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. But I didn't want to cancel. Fishing was our thing, and I didn't want to be the one to spoil it with my nerves. I finished my coffee, packed up my gear, and headed out. The air was crisp and cool as I walked down the familiar dirt path that led through the woods. It was the kind of morning that usually made me feel alive. The trees towered overhead, their thick branches swaying gently in the breeze, creating a soft rustling sound that usually put me at ease. But today, that sound felt different. It was like the trees were whispering, murmuring warnings I couldn't quite understand, urging me to turn back. I ignored the feeling and pushed on, my boots crunching softly against the dirt trail. Soon, the trees thinned out, the trail opening up to the familiar sight of the Great Lake. Its waters were calm, dark and endless, stretching out like a black mirror under the dull, overcast sky. I'd been here countless times before, but today, it felt different. Like the lake was holding its breath, waiting for something. Tom was already there, standing near the old wooden dock, waving as he saw me approach. He looked relaxed, like nothing in the world could bother him. He always was the confident one. "About time you got here," he called out, grinning as he set up his rod. "Did the latest news about the merman scare you?" I nodded, dropping my gear beside him with a half-hearted smile. "Yeah, it did. It doesn't sound like just a scare this time, though. People are missing. Tom, you heard about them, right?" Tom waved me off, his usual carefree attitude on full display. "Come on, Josh. We've had werewolves, ghosts, haunted trees, man-eating flowers, and whatever else lurking around this country for years." He shrugged. "I've never seen a merman, and I doubt today will be the first time. Besides, the fish are biting better than ever out here." "Maybe so," I muttered, casting a glance at the water. The surface was still, but the stillness felt unnatural, almost oppressive. But I'm still not going to the usual spot. I'll fish further down the shore, away from the deeper part of the lake. Tom shrugged, unfazed. "Suit yourself. But you're missing out, man. The fish practically jump into your boat near the dock. I'm sticking with the hot spot." He gave me a mock salute before heading toward the deeper part of the lake, setting up near the dock where we usually fished. I watched him go. an uneasy pit forming in my stomach. There was something off about today, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I knew the stories about the Merman were likely exaggerated, but after hearing about the missing people and the strange sounds people had reported around the lake, I couldn't just ignore it. Not this time. I picked up my gear and headed down the shore, deciding to fish from a shallow cove tucked away behind some thick bushes. It wasn't our usual spot, but it was far enough from where Tom was, and that gave me a small sense of relief. The trees hung over the water here, casting deep shadows across the surface, and the wind had picked up slightly, sending ripples across the lake. It was quiet. Too quiet, if I was being honest. But I convinced myself that I was overthinking things. The hours dragged by, and I caught little more than a few small bites. The wind had picked up, stirring the surface of the lake into gentle waves, and the sky darkened with the promise of rain. I checked my watch. Tom had been fishing at the dock for hours, and I hadn't heard from him. Maybe he was having better luck, but something about the quiet unsettled me. Usually we'd shout across the water, joke around, or compare our catches. But today, there was only silence. Or maybe I was just too far to hear him. Anyway, as the sun was gone and it was pretty much dark, I started to pack up my gear, disappointed with the day's haul. There was an eerie calm in the air, the kind that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I told myself it was just the wind, that I was overthinking everything. But the feeling of unease had been gnawing at me ever since the news report that morning. Just as I began to head back down the trail, I heard it. "Help! Help me!" I froze mid-step, my blood turning to ice in my veins. It was Tom. His voice rang out clear through the trees, unmistakable. The sound sent a jolt of fear straight to my core, every instinct in my body telling me something was wrong. "Someone! Anyone! Please help!" he screamed again. But there was something off about it. It didn't have the urgency of a real panic. It was almost mechanical, like it was being forced. My grip tightened on my fishing rod, the reel slipping slightly as sweat formed on my palms. I grabbed my gear and started running toward the sound, my boots thudding against the dirt, heart hammering in my chest. As I got closer, something about the way he was screaming became clearer and more unsettling. The tone didn't change. No breaks for breath. No crack of panic in his voice. It was the same pitch, over and over, like a recording stuck on loop, echoing through the woods. My heart pounded harder, thumping against my ribcage like it was trying to break free. I slowed my pace, the fear wrapping tighter around me, squeezing my chest. The woods were eerily silent now, except for Tom's continuous cries for help. No birds, no rustling leaves, just his voice, steady, relentless. I crouched low behind a thicket of bushes, the scent of damp earth and pine filling my lungs as I moved carefully toward the dock. The lake was in view now, and the silence was so thick it felt suffocating. My eyes darted around, scanning for movement, for any sign of what was happening. And then, just as suddenly, the screaming stopped. The silence was deafening. My heart hammered so loudly in my ears that I thought it would give me away. Tom was lying half submerged in the water, motionless, like a rag doll that had been tossed aside. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. But that wasn't the worst of it. A figure crouched over him, its back to me, long, sinewy arms and webbed hands digging into his flesh like it was pulling him apart, piece by piece. The Merman. It was real. It wasn't just some rumor or urban legend. It was right there. Its black, empty eyes focused on Tom's lifeless face as it tore into him with sharp, needle-like teeth. I could barely breathe, my chest tightening with fear. The sight of it froze me in place, and for a moment, I was paralyzed. My mind screamed for me to run, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, unable to wake up, unable to move. I backed away slowly, my legs shaking, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every step felt like I was wading through thick, heavy air, my muscles tight with fear. The creature didn't notice me. too focused on its gruesome meal. Its tail thrashed slightly in the water, sending ripples across the lake's surface. But it remained hunched over Tom, feeding without pause. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me as fast as they could through the woods. The branches slapped against my face, my arms, cutting into my skin, but I didn't care. The only thing that mattered was getting as far away from that thing as possible. The trail was a blur beneath my feet, my vision tunneling as adrenaline took over. The trees around me seemed to close in, dark and oppressive, their branches clawing at me like they were trying to hold me back. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. By the time I reached my house, I was drenched in sweat, gasping for air, my chest heaving with each breath. I slammed the door behind me, locking it with shaking hands before collapsing against the wall. My heart was still racing, my mind spinning as the reality of what I'd just seen crashed over me. Tom was gone. He was dead. And that thing, that monster from the lake, it was still out there, lurking, waiting. I sat in that position for what felt like hours, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The images of Tom, of the merman tearing into him, flashed through my mind over and over again. I couldn't shake the sound of his voice, that horrible, steady scream for help that wasn't really him. It was as if the creature had learned to mimic his voice, to lure me into its trap. I wiped the sweat from my brow, my hands still trembling as I stared at the door, half expecting the creature to burst through at any moment. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to return to the lake, to that place that had once been my refuge. And all I could do was sit in the dark, trembling, wondering if the merman would come for me next.